Good morning, everybody. My name's Brenda Kress. Hold on a second here. I'm pressing the wrong buttons. This is what happens when you give me control. There we go, Myra. I lost you for a second. Okay, there we go. Welcome, everybody. I'm Brenda Kress. I'm the Executive Director for the Sacramento Hospice Consortium. Some of you have been following us along with our speaker series there. And if you remember, last time Myra had to reschedule, and I think she'll probably be sharing a little bit about why she did as part of what she does. So we're excited to have Myra here, and I'm going to do a little intro so you get to know her a bit. During and after the loss of several friends with whom she shared in the care of and assisted those others who were involved, she experienced a calling to hospice nursing. At the time, she was nearly 30 years, with the goal always being the promotion of health and life. But it was only after becoming a hospice nurse that she recognized her calling in the field of death and dying. It was during those years, being hundreds of people as they transitioned and assisting the family and caregivers, that she came to understand that this process was much more than a beloved's passing. She became aware that it was not only the dying person, but all the present and care support. It was at this time that she came to see herself in the role that she is now, a certified end-of-life guide. And right before we welcome Myra, I do want to remind everybody, if you have questions, please put them in the chat area and we'll address them towards the end. So Myra, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm feeling blessed to be able to talk to the hospice volunteers. They are among my favorite people. God bless you all for everything that you do. Without you, hospice wouldn't even exist, because the early days of hospice was all about volunteering. So it's a wonderful thing you do. So I'm going to start out with just a little story that I wrote in regards to my most recent client. And this is the client that, because of circumstances, she was at end of life, and I needed to reschedule. So I'm here today instead. So I will it's a very brief little story about her journey. Muhasebe was a self-determined woman, and while she allowed others to occasionally voice an opinion, particularly her family, she ultimately reserved the last word about her life. She did so because she was clear whose life it was. So it was no surprise to anyone who knew her that if circumstances would allow, she would hold power over her life until the very last moments. Because she had no doubts about being an eternal spirit and was certain she would live beyond this life, she never expressed fear about dying. In fact, she never expressed fear at all, though you might have expected her to. By the time Muhasebe and I met, she had spent decades suffering and was in such compromised physical state that she no longer was able to enjoy much of what gave passion to her life. In fact, for many years, she had been unable to even accomplish the simple activities of daily living without an assistant. Muhasebe asked me to be her guide because she had gone into end-stage kidney disease and was happy and relieved that something would cause her death. While all other health conditions were the cause of her pain and suffering, they would not cause death, meaning possible years or decades of continued suffering had she not had this one terminal condition. The vision Muhasebe held for her final days included having a well-planned dying experience, contributing to her obituary, planning her green burial, completing legacy projects, having a final conversation with her closest friends and family, and completing the task, which would assure that her family would make a smooth transition to life without her. In addition to all this, she also took the steps required to die on her own clock. Mahasabi was a proponent of the California End-of-Life Option Act, so considering the choice did not come as a huge surprise to her family. In fact, her son said that he was surprised she hadn't made the decision earlier. By the time the chosen day arrived, Mahasabi felt ready to take the big leap. Having left little to fate, she had succeeded in planning the event with the careful consideration it deserved. Now, because of COVID-19, only her immediate family and I were there, along with her beloved dog, Zoe. But there was ample time for music, chanting, watching a short video together, private conversations with each individual family member, lots of laughter, and champagne. There was no hesitating or second thoughts when the time came. As she smiled at us all, she said, "I'm very happy." And although if you listen closely, you might have heard some hearts break, her family were beside her, supporting her to the very last breath. It seemed easy, although it couldn't have been, for her family to maintain unwavering, selfless love on that last day and all the days that led up. They seemed to know that for the sake of love, we're called to set aside our own pain, if only for a little while. So I'm planning on writing an article maybe for publication somewhere that will go more in depth about her end-of-life experience, because in my opinion, she did such a superb job of doing that. So that sort of leads me into what exactly an end-of-life doula is. And that is the term you will hear the most. I call myself an end-of-life guide because it just resonates with me more, but you'll hear terms like death doula, doula to the dying, but the one that is the most recognized is the end-of-life doula. So basically, the way that I defined an end-of-life doula is, it is non-medical, and it's a holistic approach to what is considered a normal life event, something that all of life on the planet is called to do. So it's seen from that perspective, and it's holistic. It considers that although there is a person in the family that is dying, there's something happening to everyone in that family, everyone in that micro community. And so their needs are addressed pretty equally as far as that's concerned. So think of the end-of-life doula as the old lady in the village, because once upon a time, that's the way it was. But the way that we live life now on the planet, there aren't very many old ladies in the village that have done this so much that they're comfortable with it, you know, and I think that's what it is. That little old lady had been in all the villagers' homes, and she knew what death and dying looked like, and she had made peace with it enough to be that support and that guidance to the family when their beloved is dying. So what would you imagine that person would do? He or she would do anything that's necessary to make sure that things are going smoothly and they're on course. And if something starts to go wrong, that person's going to know what to do to make it right. And that person's going to know how to prevent a lot of things from going wrong. Kind of like having, going to court without an attorney versus with an attorney. You know, you just feel better because, you know, someone there knows, you know, what's going on and can support you and represent you. So basically that's it.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm reminded of, Myra, is my husband's from Greece. So when you were talking about the old lady in the village, they have a totally different way of looking at that over there. I mean, it's part of life. Kids aren't immune from it. It's in the home. And you do have the yayas and the people in the villages, even Athens, it's not a village, but that are comfortable with it. It's not a hidden thing. And so you had the guides, sometimes as a family member, sometimes a wise woman or wise man even in the village. So I like how you put that.
Thank you.
So one of the things that also comes up for me, being that we're hospice and we have our teams, right? And we have volunteers who are part of the team. So if we have hospice in the teams, what then would be the need to have the doula or the guide on top of that?
Mm-hmm. That's a question that I get a lot. You know, it is a little difficult to understand because hospice does provide so much. It almost seems as though there's no need being unmet, you know, when it comes to hospice. And I know because I was a hospice nurse for so many years. They do provide a lot of support for the dying person and the family members. But hospice has constraints. The main payer for hospice, as we all know, is Medicare, and they get to kind of, you know, set the guidelines. And so what that means is, as much as hospice would like to be there whenever they feel like they need the help from hospice, that can't always be the case. And so I do a lot of things that hospice does, but my availability is so much greater. I am a private pay. It's not a covered benefit, yet I'm happy to say it's a very affordable service for families, and I say that with confidence because I make it so. I will do whatever's necessary. I don't say no. I want to be that support and guidance. And so my contract says that I'm available. That can be weekends, holidays, 2:00 in the morning. You know, I'm there. And of course, the big difference between what an end-of-life doula does and what hospice does is hospice is a medical model, and an end-of-life doula is from the perspective of this is a natural, normal life event, and I'm here to support it, and I'm here to help that person have a better experience at end of life, and I'm here to make sure that the family and loved ones have an easier time with it.
That's really good. Yeah, in talking to different hospice organizations, I think they have some of the same feelings you do, right? That it could be a nice partnership, you know, an added benefit. And like you said too, the family and those surrounding the person dying are just as important. And you address their needs as well, right?
Actually, I would say that oftentimes the assistance that I give is more for the family and loved ones, because hospice does a bang-up job. They do. I mean, they really tend to the needs of the dying person, and dying is a natural, normal event, of course, but there can be hiccups. And so hospice does such a good job with managing symptoms and things like that. But realistically, hospice is in the home of the dying person for some hours. Let's call it 6 hours. Let's call it 10 hours a week. The end-of-life doula can be there a lot more than that, and particularly at the end of life when everyone in the room is biting their nails. I mean, the intensity is just enormous. To have that person be able to stay there through the process if necessary, that and the person at that point, as we all know who are in the hospice field, you know, the end stages of the active dying is semi-comatose, you know, keeping the lips moist and rotating so there's no bed sores and things like that, that kind of care. And it's pretty, it's not that challenging, you know, if you know what to do for that person who's making their transition. The challenge becomes in those last hours and days, how difficult it is to say goodbye to a beloved. And so that's where I will tend to focus my attention and support, is to those loved ones.
Well, one thing, and we'll talk about your book, which somebody's going to have a copy of that. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but one thing I do like about it is I like your glossary of terms. Because, and I'm assuming that's where you're real helpful too, is explaining some of the steps in the process. Now, I know when hospice comes in, and my personal experience is a little bit as a volunteer, and some have heard my story, tiny bit with my dad, because we only had hospice maybe 5 days before my dad passed. So I didn't have the full benefit. But some of the things happening, I kind of knew because I read a lot of books. But what I like what you do, and I'm assuming you do with families, is explain some of the things that are going on in real life language.
Right. And, you know, that beautiful booklet that is given to the family called Gone From My Sight explains a lot for the family. But even though they've seen it, they've maybe even read it, when someone you love is dying, it feels like a crisis. And I don't know if you've ever been in a crisis before, but you don't think so straight. And so what I wind up doing is reviewing much of what hospice has already done, but they just weren't in a place at that moment for it to really absorb. So I'll review it again with them. And especially becomes important when that breathing pattern changes, as an example. And the family become anxious about that change that they're seeing. Then I can review what hospice has gone over with them and say, oh, remember, this is one of the things that they're telling us that we should expect at end of life, and this is what it looks like, and it's okay, and, you know, those sort of things. So I really partner with hospice very, very well, and I love to do so because, as we all know, the people who work at hospice are just amazing, the social workers and the clergy, and they just all contribute to make such a difference for people. So I love that partnership.
Well, that, you know, I read a little bit of your story from the back of your book, you know, and your website about you, but how did you actually make that decision? Or what are some of the stories that led you to the decision to go from being a hospice nurse to an end-of-life doula?
Good question. So at the deciding moment, I call it my aha moment, because I was having coffee one morning with my husband. He was talking about probably fishing or something. And I just had this moment where I thought, you know, as much as I love what I do as a hospice nurse, I think what I really, really feel like I'm contributing to is that support and guidance for everyone in the family. And I felt like as a hospice nurse, much of what I was doing didn't involve giving medication or changing a dressing, or it involved sitting with the family, assuring, holding their hand, having my arm over their shoulder, you know, those sort of things. And so I literally dreamed up Compassionate Crossings in 2013, and I started putting it together. I think it was 2015, I made it official, got the business license, took all the steps to, you know, to put it in place, and haven't looked back. I'll tell you, I love it. And then a couple of years later, I started working on the book, and of course published that last year. That was about 3 years of work to get that done. But you know, the main reason that I think that there's a lot, but the main reason that I was called to do the work that I do is because all those years, and even myself and the loss that I had experienced, which I've lost a lot of meaningful people in my life, I realized that we just don't do a good job of it here. You know, in the United States, we're a death-denying society. And so during those years, I kept seeing evidence of that families just weren't ready, and they were like a deer in the headlights, you know, so I started wondering, well, why is this happening? And I realized it's fear, you know, and I call it paralyzing fear, because they're so fearful about not only their own end-of-life experience, but their loved ones as well, that it prevents them from honoring it. And it's an era as our era, our college years, or our marriage, or any other era that we can take a look at. It's equally important. In fact, I would say in some ways it's more important, because the way the way our end of life experience goes will impact those who love us, that are there with us, because they're going to carry those memories with them for the rest of their life. You know, my partner who helped me create Compassionate Crossings, she is an ovarian cancer survivor, which those are rare. And that was like 20 years ago. But when she first was diagnosed, she said she thought to herself, I have to do this well. They'll be watching me. And I think that that's something to think about. If we create, and that's why the subtitle of the book is Creating Your Happy Ending. If we create our end of life to be an important era for us and our family, that's an act of love, you know?
You know what I'm thinking of too, Myra, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm thinking about is rituals. So when somebody dies, we have the rituals. Some do wakes, you know, some do, you have the funerals, the celebration of life, but leading up to it, there doesn't seem to be as many rituals. And I know, again, my parents lived in Mexico for 17 years and heavy in rituals prior to the death. I mean, again, it's in the home and everybody's around, and you do different things that create comfort in the family unit. So I'm assuming that's something that a death doula also can bring in.
Absolutely. And it's also, you know, dependent on what their faith is, what their religion is, or spirituality, or, you know, and that is some of the questions that I ask early on, because I want to know. I mean, I had an experience as a hospice nurse that was very profound. It was a turning point for me, because this family, what was required at the moment of death, and this was my first day with the family, so I had no ability to even understand it. But when the person took the last breath, the family were giving me instructions on what they would like me to do. Do this, and then do this, and do this, you know, sort of thing. And I was doing it, of course. But I realized that when I was putting together Compassionate Crossings and imagining what role I would play, I thought, I need to understand, at least have a basic understanding of the major religions. There's hundreds of them, so I mean, I can't possibly know them all, but at least the major ones, so that I know what they are going to need, and so that I can, if it's important to get the candles lit, or whatever that contributes to that ritual that brings more meaning to the event for them, it's in my heart to want to do that. So yes, very, very important.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it sounds like it. My mind's spinning, because I could just think of all the great partnerships in end of life, because at Sacramento Hospice Consortium, that's one thing we talk about as a group, you know, on not just the services of hospice, but how do we support our volunteers? How do we support the families? And now in COVID, everything's up in the air and kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I was also thinking about then, I'm assuming this is what led you to write your book and share it, because I'll tell you what, I have not been able to read it all yet, but there's a wealth of information in here. And I'm going to send everybody the link to this, because, you know, you have thoughts and reflections at the end, so that somebody can sit with it. There's the appendix alone has so many wonderful resources. So anyways, what led you to putting it all in here?
Yeah, so, you know, if you haven't already experienced death and dying in your family, and many people have not, although I will say that being in the COVID-19 days is sort of changing that a little bit. I mean, not a huge amount, but more so. I mean, if you compare us to third world countries, developing countries, I'm sad to say it, but they see it, you know, pretty regularly in their life. And so it's like you've said, you know, in Mexico, maybe in those impoverished areas where it's so sad that you know, people don't get to live to be 85 or 90 like, you know, we have learned how to do here in the United States. And so many of us in our communities have nothing to draw on. We have no knowledge ahead of time. And because we're death denying, we don't even want it. You know, we don't want to be even having a conversation. And that's a whole nother subject altogether about how do you have conversations with your loved ones ahead of time, because so many people are resistive to it. Luckily, there are different tools now that you can, like conversations, what is the name of that organization? I'll think of it in a moment, but there are websites that you can go on to that will help. Let's Have Dinner and Talk About Death is an organization that you can go on to, invite the family over during dinner, talk about it. There's different ways that people are coming up with so that we can open the door to these conversations. But as generally speaking, that's just not the case. And so I would be helping a family that would, like I said earlier, it would be like, you know, deer in the headlights sort of thing. And they just had no clue about the experience or, you know, what choices they have. Choices is very huge to me. Like we were talking earlier about the green burial, just knowing that we have other choices besides the standard, you know, funeral. So I knew that there was a knowledge deficit in at least in the United States. And so I just wanted there to be a resource for people to go to that would not only explain, you know, what is it? What does it look like? Who are the helpers? Like, you know, and today what happens is our children go off to college and then they stay in that community in Cincinnati. And so then as we're getting older, we don't have any children or maybe one child that's there to help us. And so maybe at the end of our life, we would need a professional caregiver to come in and help our only child that's, you know, there to help. So resources, and like you said, at the end of each chapter, there's a page on thoughts and reflections about, you know, I'm going to look into this, you know, or just write yourself a little note about what you might want to do. And then at the back of the book is an actual to-do list, and it encourages you to check it off as you do it. So things like, you know, the first chapter in the book is estate planning. And the reason for it is because I think if you don't do anything else, I mean, I think anyone who is 18 years old should have an advanced healthcare directive, because you're considered an adult and you make your own decisions about your care, your health care. And honestly, unless you're working in the field, you don't know what kind of choices there are at end of life, what kind of healthcare choices are even ones that you would consider. So I wanted to make sure that people understood that they can decide they can make these decisions ahead of time so that someone else is not A, burdened with having to make that decision for them, and B, having to be a mind reader, trying to figure out, well, would mom want to be on a ventilator? You know, would dad want CPR in these circumstances? And so, and I say in the book, you know, it's an act of love when we make these choices for ourselves. So it's designed so that it will be help, just practical help for what is this thing called death and dying, and way to educate yourself about it, and then to also maybe conquer some of the fear associated with it. Because like I said, you know, that paralyzing fear prevents us from even being, I don't know if you've ever experienced paralyzing fear, but I have. I was climbing a cliff at the ocean one time, and I was doing fine. I was grabbing, and then I would grab, And I got to a point where I felt unsafe and I literally could not move my body. I couldn't. They had to come rescue me. It was just so crazy. But that's what happens when something is so fearful for us, we just can't move forward. And so the book helps a person take a fresh look at death and dying. And basically, it's a lot more than that, but basically it's, hey, this death and dying thing is something that everything on the planet does. And can I take a different look, a different approach? Can I have a different stand on it? You know, I said the other day in a conversation, I said, if you say something is difficult, it is, you know? So it's a matter of how you approach it, and hopefully it will take away some of that fear and cause the reader to want to be proactive about creating their happy endings. So.
Yeah, well, that's what I liked about it. And when you said choices, right? Because we don't know we have choices until we know there are choices.
Yes.
The whole field of burial, until I started looking into it a little bit, really just as little as 2 or 3 years ago, I thought everybody had to be embalmed. And I thought there were only 2 choices: you were buried or you were cremated. And that was it. Those are the only choices I knew of.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, I think I've asked people, you know, how do you think your life will be at the end of your life? And often I get like, I have no idea. You know, how can I know that? Well, you know, only 1 in 10 of us will die unexpectedly. The rest of us are going to know. And so I know, you know, it's like a joke where the person goes to the priest and says, oh my God, I've been told that I'm going to die. And the priest says, you needed someone to tell you? You know, we are. So it's just a matter of making peace with it, saying, hey, if this is the way it was designed, it can't be wrong. I mean, billions of us humans have already done it successfully. I mean, you know, death and dying isn't as hard as what we make it out to be. And so I'm so hopeful that those who choose to read that book will at least come away with a little bit less fear about it.
Well, and it's like you said too, it's a major life event. We plan for the arrival of a baby. We plan for birthday parties and milestone markers in our life. But when it comes to death, it's just like, okay, if I don't plan for it, it won't happen. You know, and which we know is not true. So what I like about what you do and others in the field is to give us the tools. That's what's so great about your book. There's tools and things about choices, and the opportunity to talk about this so that we can make a happier ending for ourselves and our loved ones. And that also makes me wonder too, a question that just popped up a minute ago was, is your job done once the person passes away?
That's a good question. Yeah. So it was a God-given gift. It wasn't something I had to practice to get good at. I just have an ability to be a calming factor in a lot of circumstances. Always have been. I've had coworkers tell me throughout my whole nursing career that, you know, I am the calming presence when things are crazy. And so I can be very comforting during that time when everyone is losing their beloved, but I can also continue to be comfort for them after their beloved has made their transition, and happy to do so. I check in on my clients for, you know, quite some time. Usually they'll just stop returning my calls and they'll know that they're good, you know. But I don't have any letters behind my name that says I am a grief counselor, and I recognize that. So, you know, I definitely can lead them towards help in that field, and happy to do that. There's some great people. There's of course, Michelle Mariscal, who does the grief work. So I let the experts take on a lot of that. But let me say one thing about what you said earlier. I love this quote. If you know who John Underwood was, he was the person who created the Death Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a decade ago or so. Which, by the way, I am one of the hosts for the Death Cafes in Sacramento, and I love doing them. But one of his quotes that I love is, just as sex will not cause, start all over again. Just as talking about sex will not cause pregnancy, talking about death will not cause death. So, it's okay to talk about it. It's like buying health or life insurance and thinking that that's going to make you die. It won't. So,
right.
Yeah.
We just need more people like you where we can talk about it and be comfortable about it and know there's resources out there.
Right. So yeah, come to a Death Cafe. They're of course not being held right now, but there is one on Zoom. So if you go to Meetup, find Death Cafe, register, then you'll get notices about when those occur. And
that's
it's
great.
just a good opportunity to talk about some, and a lot of people who come to Death Cafe say that that's why they come, because they want to talk about it, because they know in talking about it, it just gets softer, so
exactly.
Good way to do it.
Yeah, I love it. And anybody that's been on the previous calls or in any group around Sacramento with me, it's my favorite topic, because I just feel it's death and dying and end of life and everything about it. The conversation is so rich. There's so many layers to it, and we're so much more expanded when we can talk about it. It's not going to make it, like you said, it's still going to happen. There's still going to be grief. There's still going to be pain. We're going to lose somebody. Like you said in the very beginning, that's something that's not going to change, but the way we approach it and the memories that we can encapsulate around it can be much different. That's what we carry forward with us. So that's what I like about your work and the work of others in this field. So I've been chatting for a while, and so has Myra. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, type them in the chat, and I will read them. We'd love to hear personally from everybody, but we also know we don't have a lot of time. So Colleen typed in compassionate conversations. So I know that there's some groups doing it. Do you know much about it, Myra? I mean, I ran a group called Compassionate Conversations, but it was about compassion and self-compassion and not end of life.
I do not know very much about that organization, no. But I know that there are several. If you do a Google search on how to talk about death and dying, oh my goodness. There's even, you can get a deck of cards that are like we'll ask a question for people to answer. So then that kind of kickstarts the conversation. There's lots of ways to do it. Yeah, but some of them can even be fun, like asking the question to the group.
Right. And actually, one thing, I was going to save it to the end, I'll tell it now, but I bought a death deck to talk about it. So one of the sessions I want to do in this series is to have an opportunity to have people call in, and we'll pull cards from the death deck. Two things here. Jen wants me to repeat, to put it privately, but I'm going to tell everybody, repeat the title of the book. So it's Dying Made Easier, Creating Your Happy Ending. And I'm going to send everybody a link to it. And then Colleen asked, can you talk about a little bit more? No, excuse me, it's Melinda. Can you talk a little bit more about green burials?
Yes. Although, again, that's not my expertise. And I think we had talked, you and I, Brenda, about maybe someone coming on and giving, a really nice presentation of green burials. But essentially, there are people who are very concerned about Mother Earth. And just to give you a little brief history of how the funeral industry came to be what it is in this country. It began during the Civil War, and families were wanting their sons and husbands' bodies to come home. So that's when the development of using the formaldehyde to preserve the body in order to transport it home. And then at that time, there was the Irish call it a wake, so they would have the person available, and then everyone in the town could come visit. So from there, they decided that it might make a really good profession, where there could be people who would become educated on how to do it well. And so there could be preservation of the body so that the burial wouldn't need to happen so soon, giving time for people to come in from out of town or whatever. And then also they made it available for the families to have their gatherings and their celebrations there at that one place, instead of in their parlor back in that day. So it just became an industry, so to speak. And I think back then, I don't think we realized that formaldehyde maybe isn't the greatest thing for the soil, or for Mother Earth. And we also, and again, we talk so much about fear with death and dying because formaldehyde sounds crazy, but it gives us some comfort. It's almost like it prevents us from dying because it preserves us or something. And then we put our beloved in a casket that has all these chemicals on it to keep the casket from breaking down over time as well. So we've, put this into the earth, and now it's going to be here for a long period of time. And so there are people who just started thinking outside the box, so to speak. And the funeral industry as it is right now isn't like we're talking, it's not that old really. So it wouldn't be that hard to go back to what it was before, all of this. And so people are just saying, why don't we just put the person's body in the soil as it is? Let's make sure that if the person is in a container, or if we choose to wrap the person's body, that we do so with materials that will biodegrade. It's not necessary to put them in a lacquered casket. We can put them in a pine box. And for that matter, it can even be a cardboard box, and a lot of people do. And speaking about the ceremonies, some people will have a ceremony around decorating the cardboard box or whatever, and everybody gets to write on it, "Goodbye, Grandma, we love you so much," or whatever it is. So even that can bring meaning to it. They also have these pods that you can purchase that has fungus that makes the body break down sooner. I'm not sure that I personally would choose that, just because I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with Mother Nature's way of breaking down my body, but it's certainly a choice. And I think that they're going to be doing some stuff with a solution. I'm not sure it's gotten approval yet, but I think in the near future there's going to be a bath, so to speak, that the body goes into. It breaks down very, very quickly, leaving not much that's left, and then that can go into the soil because it's natural. So look for that in the future. People are getting away from cremation. It's become the thing in my lifetime, but we're starting to see where it's kind of losing its popularity because, again, there are people who are concerned about clean air, and that's not contributing to that. So yeah, the more that you research, the more you find. But I can say that with my recent client that I read the story about her life, she chose a place where she was wrapped in a biodegradable, beautiful cloth and lowered down. It was just that simple. And she was preserved until that could happen with dry ice. So it really was not difficult. The thing about the green barrels, though, a lot of times you run into the risk of running out of time. So if it's something that you really find valuable for yourself, a valuable choice for your own self, I would recommend that you go ahead and do your research, find what works for you, and get it started. Yeah, today. Have it in place.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Let's see. Rory. Question about the business aspect. Since you are available 24/7 for a client, do you take on multiple clients at once? If not, do you refer to another doula? Could you speak a little bit about the business model, such as advertising? Is it word of mouth or paid resources for people interested in end-of-life doula?
Okay. So let's see here.
There's a lot in there. Sorry, I packed it all
There's
together.
there's a lot in there, yeah. So yes, I have a contract that says that I am available whenever humanly possible. And that can entail a lot of hours at the last of that person's life, kind of like what happened when I was scheduled to do this and wasn't able to, you know. So if I, for example, if I have a client that it looks like they are at end of life, or certainly if they're in what, you know, the hospice calls the active dying phase, I will not consider taking another client. And you know, even when clients they're doing well, you know, everything's going great. Generally speaking, 3 is as many as I want to be able to manage, because I make that commitment of being there, you know, whenever they need me to be there. Now, sometimes that can be an email or it could be a text, but most of the time they really want me there. They want me in that room with them, and I want to be there. So I intentionally do not overwhelm my plate, so to speak. I would love to know of other end-of-life doulas in the community that would like for me to be able to call them should that happen. It has not happened yet, but it sure would be nice. And so if anyone knows another end-of-life doula in the community that they would like to pass on my information, that would be great. And how do I make myself known in the community? This, I think, for me has been my biggest challenge, because being a nurse for going on 4 decades now, I got up every morning and put on a uniform, and I went to work, and I never even had to think about how do you make yourself known so that people know you exist. So having a website and a Facebook page and designing brochures and things like that was all a big learning curve for me. But I try to speak these kinds of opportunities. I've done a couple of workshops at the libraries. I love to teach. So any opportunity that I get to talk so that people will learn about compassionate crossings and pass the word on. But generally speaking, I get calls from other professionals in the senior industry, so to speak, or at my spiritual center. They know what I do. And I am a subcontracted service for Yellow Hospice. So sometimes they will get a client that just needs that extra layer of support, and they will give me a call.
That's good. Redbud has a question. How do you establish your fee? And he wonders the process by which you introduce what you can offer at the first contact with family and friends.
Okay, so yeah, it's kind of like an intake. When I see a family, when I go visit a family for the first time, so I ask a lot of questions. I want to know, who are the people in this person's life who are going to be here with that person on this journey with him or her, and what kind of challenges are they having? Where am I going to need to step in and maybe help them to create a community calendar for who can be, present at any given time, and those sort of tasks, and help with writing the obituary or whatever it is that they're asking, my help with. I want to know that so that I can sort of create a care plan for the way that I'm going to help them. So when I put all this stuff together, working in the field for so long and seeing these families and their plate being so full with so much to manage at the end, I didn't want to contribute to that. And so my business partner that helped me create Compassionate Crossings, we had long discussions about it, and we decided that if we had a retainer's fee, that when we first meet, first do the intake, they write one check, and then there's no more thought about, I'm going to need to pay Myra when she comes to visit today or whatever. We were more comfortable with that. It's almost, I think of the all-inclusive vacations, when you go, you can, get involved in all the activities and everything and not think about, oh, I have to pay $100 to go to this excursion because it's part of it. So there's not the consciousness so much about paying me. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, though, I will certainly do that if that's more convenient for them. I find that with all the time that I'm there, it's actually saving money to pay a retainer's fee than it is to pay per hour when I show up. But like I said in the beginning, I'm so negotiable. I'll do whatever works out for the family. And I'll even help with some creative ways on how to pay not only for my fee, but how to pay for extra caregivers if they need that. So I've got some tricks up my sleeve as far as those things are concerned as well.
Well, I'm assuming, and we're going to have to wrap it up here in a minute, but I'm assuming as your industry, being an end-of-life guide, becomes more mainstream, it will hopefully be incorporated into the systems that have, where there's a way that it can be paid for. Because I find it super valuable. I adore hospice, and you bring another key into it. I think that's really vital. And I think you would be a support to the team, the disciplinary team that works in hospice. So we're getting there. And hopefully with more and more people learning about what you do and talking about it, we can help affect a little bit of change there too.
I think so. The birthing doulas, right. Their infant days, and what it is now, they're a covered benefit for a lot of insurances now. So right. I think that might happen.
I think so too. Fingers crossed. So everybody, Myra's website is it
www.compassionatecrossings.net.
Okay. So you can find a lot of good stuff there. We have Dying Made Easier, and I'll send you all the link when I get the video done. And now I have a little bag. Everybody's name who registered is in here. So I'm going to reach in. I'd have Myra do it, but we haven't worked the virtual thing out yet. Okay, let's see. You can see I'm not looking. All right. I have glasses, Brenda. Kathleen Castillo. So Kathleen, if you're on a call, just send me your mailing address, brenda@sachospice.org. If not, I'm going to send you an email if you weren't able to join us. So everybody, coming up next, we don't have it firm, but we have a team of bereavement teams from the different hospices with the grief counselors are putting together a program that's going to address grief a little bit deeper and differently than we did with Michelle. They're going to have some panel discussions, and we're working on that now. I want to have some conversations. Like I said, I want to have one where I pull this death deck out and practice with you guys. We can play with it and see how we can have those conversations too. So stay tuned as we develop more ways to keep our volunteers engaged, why some of our roles have been a little bit diminished or held back because of COVID. So thank you, Myra, for your time. I adore you, and I'm so glad we got to spend this time with you this morning.
Thank you, Brenda. So appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for everything you do.
Thank you, everybody. I'm now going to sign us off, and I look forward to you on our next call. Bye-bye.
Bye.